As I always say, we want questions, we welcome questions. Try to keep them in context of the lesson due to the time. If you have a question that's just burning in your heart, but it's not according to the lesson, then just give it to me when I come out of the pulpit. That's no problem. If you have your Bibles, turn to Romans chapter 8. We're going to pick up at verse 31. Romans chapter 8 and the verse 31. We had spoke last week about this big word that in philosophy's created a lot of issues, and that's the term predestination, or to have your destiny be set prior to. And if you don't look into these Bible words, that can almost seem like, well, wait a minute, I can be set to go somewhere no matter what I do. That's not what that's implying. Because if that was the case, then God wouldn't have told us that he commands all man to repent. So it's talking about God has created a vehicle, the ark of safety. In our case, the gospel of Christ through the church of Christ. As long as we remain in that vehicle until Christ comes, then we're guaranteed to go to heaven. That sounds like an offer I would do anything within my power to stay in. But then it gets into how we're called. We know we're called according to the gospel. Then it talks about how we're justified and how we're glorified. After hearing all these things that God has done, it leads us right into verse 31. What shall we say to these things? If God be for us, who can be against us? When is the last time you said that after feeling down or feeling challenged? That's a good verse to call out. Because what circumstance is bigger than God? I think we'll all say none. What enemy or challenger is bigger than God? The question is, do we live according to that? Or do we just agree with it? You see, if we don't live according to it, we're missing the point of what the scripture is all about. You're going to see why when it says we're more than conquerors, a few verses down. But we have to live according to that. I love to see people that are going through some type of challenge, but yet they're dealing with it because they know something better is coming, or there's a greater good somewhere. So it's easy for them to endure. Isn't that the best example that Christ gave us? It says he endured the cross for the joy that was set before him. Y'all know I hit that verse all the time because that joy was us. His joy was tied to bringing salvation to us. If you're blessed to be a parent and have kids and they become sick, doesn't it hit you as a parent if they're struggling with it? Don't you wish you could just take that pain from them? I remember one time growing up, one particular summer in Toledo, I had caught a cold and it hit me hard. I actually, as a kid, I thought I was going to die. Every time my mother Cubby came in the room to take care of me, I could just see the look on her face. I could just tell she would wish she could take that away in a minute. When you love somebody the way God loves us, that's why it's so important for us to serve Him to the best of our ability. Because it's and I love how Paul puts it. We're going to read this later on. That's our reasonable service. What does reasonable mean? When you say reasonable, you could say that's what's expected. If I take care of my kids, I expect for my kids to obey me. Is that more than fair? If I feed my kids and I tell my kids to take the trash out, they look at me, you take it out. I wouldn't expect that because I'm taking care of them. God sent his son. His son died in our place. And this is what he expects of us. And he says it's our reasonable service. Because of what he did, it's what's expected of us. The Bible continues on in verse 32. He that spared, here we go, he that spared not his own son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things? I love the comparison. He gave up all, but he gave us all. Remember a few verses above where it says we are co-heirs with Christ? That's amazing. I took a class, this has been years, over 10 years ago now. It dealt with gods. Any false gods was named, and they gave the history of them, and even dealt with our God, God the Father. And it was amazing. Even with people who made up gods, it didn't come close to what God has really done for us. Isn't that something you could tell somebody? Make up a God, make up as good as you could. Still doesn't compare to what God has done for us. That's what you call a power statement. And you would think it would convince some people to go ahead and come on over. And sometimes it's not that we tempt God, but sometimes we have to show these other gods who's boss. I love how I remember Elijah on Mount Carmel. I love that story. And he was standing alone. Of course, God was with him, but as a man, he was standing alone, Elijah, against over 300 false prophets of Baal, Baal, if you look that up. And they said, well, let's see whose God can bring fire from heaven and burn up all these bullocks that they had around the thing. And Elijah said, you go ahead and go first. They were calling upon their false gods. Nothing was happening. And Elijah poked at him. He said, maybe your God's asleep. Then they start cutting themselves because to them they were doing a sacrifice. Nothing happened. What did Elijah do? And I love this story. He said, go ahead and go to a ravine around it. You know, because water puts out fire, right? Go ahead and put a ravine around it. They put a ravine around it. Elijah called upon the God of heaven. God rained down fire, burned up all the bullocks, and lapped up all the water. He showed them who was boss through his actions on behalf of his God. Sometimes, can we stand for God? Sometimes we need to. Because I wonder, the Bible didn't go into graves in detail about that, but I wonder who on the other side was influenced that day. The reason why I say that, because you remember when the nation of Israel was led out of Egypt? Many times it's told that the nation of Israel came out. It wasn't just the nation of Israel. Some of the Egyptians were with them that saw like, hey, I ain't playing with this. I'm going with y'all. A right mind would do that. But that was because of the actions of those that were faithful, despite what was going on. And sometimes we have to take a hit. Is it all about our flesh? No. So the flesh is the flesh and the spirit and the soul on the same page? That's exactly right, sister. They war against one another. So that means one of them is going to get hurt sometime. And if you're feeding the spirit and the soul, the flesh is going to hurt sometimes. But the power is you know why it's hurting because you're doing what God would have you to do. That should make you feel good. Look at these athletes that train and train. You think when they're training hard, their body feels good? Oh, there's an old phrase, no pain, no gain. But you can best believe when they get on that court and they can perform, it's like it was all worth it. Put that in the context of Christianity. Bible says in verse 33, who shall lay anything to the charge of God's elect? It is God that justifies. I love that. First of all, who's God's elect? We are Christians. You know, somebody gave me another name for Satan. Starts with an S. Or I should say a meaning for Satan. Say again, I need to see your hand. Yet. Servant. Serpent was one. Yeah, well, he embodied a serpent. But to translate the word Satan, what word do you get? What are some words you get? The clue is it starts with S. It's a legal word too. That's the funny thing. Anybody ever heard the term slanderer? Satan can mean slanderer, and in the Old Testament, it actually calls him the slanderer of the brethren. In other words, you remember when Satan went in the book of Job, when Satan went before God, and he said, "Oh, he ain't so amazing." Who was he talking about? He's talking about Job. He was trying to slander Job. He says he's just doing all that good stuff because of that head you got around. Slander of the brother. When you look at this, sometime being saved, you might have done something that you feel bad about. And in some cases, it can make you feel condemned where you think you may not even be saved. But what did God say here? Who can bring a charge against God's elect? That includes Satan too. Only one person justifies us. It is God that justifies. Once you're covered in Christ's blood, it's done. Now, there still may be some earthly consequence. Remember the thief on the cross? Well, it was two, but the one who Jesus said, "Today thou shalt be with me in paradise." That meant when he went down into the Hadean world, he was going to be in the place of comfort. Until that moment came, did the thief have to pay a price? Yeah, he paid earthly price because he was a thief. You go and rob a bank, you're sitting in jail, you realize, oh man, the Church of Christ is right, and you're baptized and you're saved. You're saved, but you're still going to be in jail. Just your soul is covered. There's still an earthly consequence. But we do all that because we want to live with God in eternity. Before I go any further, questions or comments? Make sure I haven't lost anybody. Okay, let's continue. Verse 34. Notice, who is he that condemneth? It is Christ that died, yea, rather, that is risen again, who is even at the right hand of God, who also maketh intercession. You know what's amazing about that? Who else did we read about earlier that makes intercession for us? The Holy Spirit. Now we got God the Son, too. I tell people, when we're down going through something, we got to look at, many times we look at what we don't have, we got to look at what we have. The Holy Spirit prays on our behalf according to the will of God. There's no better prayer than that. You know, you hear brothers, boy, our brother can pray. I want him to pray for me. No, you want the Holy Spirit to pray for you, because he's going to do it according to the will of God. It's not, his prayer is not wrong, not missing anything. And then it says, the Son of God, Christ, intercedes for us too. Folks, look at what we have. And the focus here is, may nobody make you feel like you're condemned. Because blessed are those who walk according to God, according to the Spirit of God. To them there is no condemnation. That's Christianity. You know what gets us most time? Feelings. I did do that, but I repented and I really got my life right. But man, I did do that. I remember hearing one guy actually saying, I keep saying, look at what you keep saying you did. Did mean it's already happened. And you've repented and prayed for God. We prayed together. That's finished. But see, the feeling stayed with them. That's why when the scriptures say, cast your cares upon me, for I careth upon you, we got to do that as soon as possible. Because you let them hang with you, it can create distractions. Distractions are a horrible thing. The funniest one I could tell you guys, when I was in the Marine Corps, we did things called fast rope, which was it's like a helicopter 50 feet in the air, and it had a thick rope. And they would say, go. And it was like a minute, not even a minute, a second and a half in between them saying go for the next person to go. So they'd say, go. You had your rifle, your backpack, you got the fast rope, and you slid all the way down and landed. You had to land and let go and run. One guy was doing it for the first time. He said, go. And he looked at the guy. The guy hit him, go. And he went down the rope and he stopped. What do you think happened? That next person, 4 guys came down, boom, boom, boom on top of each other because he chose to do it his own way. That's what can happen when we hold on to sin too long. That we've been forgiven of. That's the kicking point. God has forgiven us of that. We can't let human nature, see, that's the flesh, make us hold on to it for so long. No matter how bad you did it, God's word promises us that. That's why it talks about the riches of his grace. That's rich. You might be like a Cornelius who didn't do a whole lot of bad things even before he was saved. Then you might be like a Paul who was Saul, who did a lot of bad things. Same forgiveness. His grace is that rich. So may we not get caught up in condemnation. You know what long C word we should focus on? It's one of the many works of the Holy Spirit. It's conviction. Conviction will make you think like, wow, I was wrong when I did that. I look to the word, that tells me how to go and make it right, and I do. Notice what's amazing about condemnation. I'll come right to you, Darryl. What's amazing about condemnation, it will keep you from the Bible. It will keep you from coming to the church. I'm embarrassed. I'm ashamed. And then 2 weeks turns into a month, and then months turns into months, and then months turns into years. That's a branch of what condemnation does. And a lot of people don't realize they're in it till we talk to them. I was like, you feel condemned. Don't let the conviction bring you back, because you got to make this right. The prodigal son, do you think he felt condemned? Well, not necessarily. When the prodigal son, when it said when he came to himself, he was convicted, which led him home. If he would have felt condemned, he would have said, I can't go back to my dad's house, man. They're gonna talk about me. But he came back. Look at that phrase, and when you read the story of the prodigal son, where it says, and he came to himself. It's saying he came full circle back around and knew what he had to do. That's what conviction does. Darryl, you had your hand up, buddy. Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. That's why it's so important for us to get into this book. I'm gonna give an example. I've given this example about 12 times since I've been here, but it just speaks volumes to me, and I hope it does to you. Understand why we were designed. Did God design us to carry sin? No. That's why He sent His Son. An example I like to use, when I started, you guys will probably remember. Imagine just a 5 pound dumbbell, Brother Darryl. Is 5 pound dumbbell heavy? We don't have any little kids. I think everybody can lift 5 pounds. Let's say I said, okay, go ahead and do a curl and hold it. You do it like this. You hold it for about 5 minutes. You might feel a little bit. But let's say you hold it to this, starting right now until this time tomorrow. Now it's just 5 pounds, right? You all agree. Most of us, if not all of us, at this point, is going to be like this. And I come around. What's wrong, brother Dardell? It's only 5 pounds. He's holding it too long, and it's causing a consequence of where it's hurting the body now. Probably make some of us pass out. That's the nature of sin when you hold on to it longer. When you look up that word cast, that's a powerful word. It implies two things. One is like a movie. You have a cast of a movie. You're supposed to use your fellow cast to help you overcome this. Confess your sins one to another. Let them pray for you. It also means like a fishing, where you cast out. When you cast out, you're expecting to receive something in return, right? I don't know anybody that's going fishing, go sit on a boat for 24 hours with the same cast. It's like, man, what's going on? Don't check the line, nothing. You're casting in expectation of something. What we get is forgiveness when we do it according to God's will. Does that make sense? If it doesn't, raise your hand. That's an important piece. You will suffer more than you have to if you don't take care of that. And I've had that class. It was one particular person that affected me, and I held on to it for a long time. Didn't realize it till I got a little bit heavier in my scripture. I was like, man, that's why I feel the way I do. And I had to go back to that person and apologize. But he was putting me through hell. But it's my responsibility. That's all that mattered. What God say, pray for those who rightfully use you. It's what we do. They care less about the other person. That's between them and their God if they don't serve our God. But what are we doing on behalf of our God? Questions, comments? We all right? Okay, verse 35. I love this. This is a rhetorical question. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or peril, or sword? Let's look at these. These are powerful choice words. Let's look at it. shall tribulation. Was that common during that time? Yes, it was. And it actually got worse when you get to Revelation. You were still expected to serve God. You ever heard of them, that mark of the beast? Christians were expected to deny that. But it's easy to say, what, I can't buy, sell, or trade. You had to completely trust in God. That's a life, isn't it? It says, or distress. You know what's powerful about distress? Distress doesn't necessarily mean something is happening. It's the feeling of something's about to happen. You ever heard of anxiety or worry? It all comes from distress. You know what's wild about that word? When you look at it, distress comes from ourselves. It's not really caused by anybody else. People can make us feel, if somebody, you ever see the kids when they do what they call the fake, they jump like that, and then you thought, oh, because I thought you were going to hit me. All the kid did was flinch, he didn't touch you. It's your interpretation of what was going to happen that made you do that. And this is why distress, we have to be careful in the church, because distress can bring on fear, and fear can bring on doubt. Then when you have a lot of doubt, doubt and faith can't coexist. One's going to take the other one out. What are we feeding our bodies, our soul, our spirit? It says, or persecution. Now that's the polar opposite. Somebody is doing something to you. But the thing is, how are you taking it? How are you taking it? And persecution comes in many forms. I've heard people talk about our principal in the staff lounge like dirty dog. And I'm thinking, what if he just happens to just be walking through the hallway? He can hear you. I mean, people don't think the emotions has got them so much. It's like, wow, that's just not smart. But it definitely shouldn't be named amongst the Christians. If it has you that bad, then why can't you set a meeting and sit down and say, listen, and speaking on behalf of my principal, he's open for you doing that. So then it really comes off bad. It's like he's giving you an open door and you're still talking about him to us behind. I don't want to hear about that. That's why I don't hang out in the staff lounge, folks. Because I don't want to even be mixed in that. Because you know what happens? Then when they're called into a meeting, we heard you were talking about the principal. Well, all of us was in there talking about it. Give me the names of who was in there. Boop, boop, boop. Rick Nelson. I eat in my classroom. I go in there to warm it up and I get out. So I don't want to be mixed in anything negative like that. You got something to say, let's go to the principal. I do on my job like in the church. You see, what? Let's go see Mr. Green. Well, no. You know, you're not going to tie me up in this. I don't care if you are trying to release your mind. Release your mind to the man that deserves to hear it. Ooh, or famine. Why is that one so touchy? You want something to get your attention in your body? As Les Brown says, get hungry. That'll get your attention right away. You haven't eaten in 3 days, and somebody starts grilling or frying fish, you'd almost beg them to name the price. Whatever I got in my account, just let me get a piece of that snap. Because the body is talking, vehemently it's talking. Remember when Jesus was in the, and I love some of the examples, because all these examples tie back to what Jesus went through. Remember when he was in the wilderness? What was the first way he was tempted? Turn this stone to bread, because he had been fasting for 40 days and 40 nights. He put God's word first. That's why he was able to get through it. A lot of people say, I don't get this nakedness. What is that talking about? They just put all these in the context of Christ. Remember when Paul said in Romans 1:16, for I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ? You know why shame and nakedness are mentioned? Because before you were crucified, they stripped you down and ran you through the streets. Your folks had to be present. You know how that would hurt me seeing Thomas being beaten like that and crying, and I'm looking at him? That's the nakedness. But Christ did it for whose sake? For our sake. That's why I'm saying nothing can separate us from the love of God, because he's already been through it and done it. It says, or peril. That falls right back into tribulation, just is something that you count more terrible. Remember when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane? When he first heard what he had to go through? What did he do? That's right. But what did he say? That's right. Lord God, Father, if this cup be possible, let it pass from me. But then he realized it immediately. What did he say? Not my will, but thy will be done. You see, he went through that peril willingly, knowing that was coming. Can we do that? I don't think any of us have to worry about being crucified. So we should be able to do it. Or sword. During that time, they came at you with swords. They came at Jesus with swords. Can any of us think of a circumstance of something that we're naturally fearful of, but because of a greater good, you would go through it? I have one that I've shared before, but I'm going to give you all an opportunity. Anything from anybody? Y'all still quiet? Y'all still tired from the holidays? I am. I think about most people that know me know I can't stand snakes. I don't care if it's a little non-poisonous garter snake, he's got to go. Or if it's a rattler, he's got it. If ever I woke up in the morning and my wife was in the corner screaming, and there was a big python right in front of her, now I told y'all I don't like. I should say I fear snakes. Not that I don't like them. It's just I fear them. Do you think I'm gonna say, "Oh, baby, it's been a good marriage"? Step on out to the car, Ricky, I'm coming over. There's a big snake in the house. I'm sure his first comment would be, "What about mommy?" Oh, no, you can best believe I'm going to be caught in a tussle with that snake, if it bites me or not, because of a greater love for my wife. I happen to be the man. But that pales in comparison of what this is talking about. But can we drive through things that scare us, fear us, because of a greater love for what God has for us? That's what this is talking about. In our case, it might be a boss that's hard on you unjustifiably, or somebody messing with you. Can you still go through that as a Christian? Because it's not about what you do according to what they're doing to you. It's about what you do. It's what God, as according to what God would have you. And that applies to marriage. It applies to just brother and sister relationships. It applies to co-worker relationships. You're the Christian. How are you handling it? And I have to admit, since the Marine Corps, I've had more cases of where I've been challenged with people watching that I've handled more like a Christian. And I've gotten better feedback because I stood as a Christian and not as a person just saying, man, you better get back at them. Because I realized what they realize. It takes more strength to stand as a Christian than just to give somebody a piece of your mind. That's easy. Anybody can do that. But if you aren't careful, there's some recourse for that too. Well, I see you're home early today. What happened? Manager got on my nerves today. Oh, well, what happened? I don't want to talk about it. Well, what did you do? I gave him a piece of my mind. And he gave you the rest of the day off, right? Well, no, I'm actually fired. Was that really worth it? Because that was easy to do. I love when I worked at AMI, I had a supervisor that I personally couldn't stand because he would take advantage of me because he knew I could do the job. But when I reframed it, I said, everything he's telling me to do, I can do it. I don't have to stay over to do it. It made me work a little bit harder, a little bit faster, but I did it every time. Folks, I'm glad to say the day I left, he asked me, what can we do to keep you? But the place, it wasn't just him, the place was blessed. It was time for me to move on. But he saw what he was about to lose. People there would complain right to his face, he'd walk away. And he didn't realize I was watching. He would come ask me. If I didn't know how to do it, I'd say, hey, I don't know how to do it. Can I get some training? But everything he brought to me, I knew how to do it. And most of it was his job. But see, how are we as Christians going to act? We're charged to save the world, are we not? I often tell people, that means we're superheroes. That means we don't have a big S on our chest, but we should have a C somewhere that says Christian. And God, through his word, has armed us to make it through these things. If we aren't careful, we'll just choose to take them too personal, and then it gets us down, then it gets us mad. And then we get out of the zone of Christianity. And that's dangerous. Because it's one thing to lose Christianity, you don't want to lose your soul. I mean, it's one thing to lose a job, because you can get another one, but you don't want to lose your soul. And you always want to have favor in the eyes of God. Questions, comments? Good. Okay, verse 36. As it is written, for thy sake. Whose sake? Whose sake? That's actually Christ's sake. As is written, for thy sake. We, who is the we? That's Christians. We are killed all the day long. We are accounted as sheep for the slaughter. We know from Isaiah, who's the sheep? All we like sheep have gone astray. Who's the sheep there? Christians, or we are. Now it says the word killed here all the day long. Where is that coming from? Go to Galatians 2:20. One of my favorite verses. Because when you read that, we're killed all the day long. It's like, man, that sounds kind of hard. But we're not alone. Galatians 2:20. It says, I am crucified. Let's read right there. Is crucifixion a form of killing? But what's unique about this crucifixion? It deals with Christ. All the crucifixions throughout history. You know, they even had crucifixions in the Old Testament. They just did it a little different way. They took off your head and a bunch of other stuff. But it was considered crucified. It was one crucifixion in the entire world history that was different than any other one. That was the crucifixion of Christ. We want to be part of that crucifixion. Why? Because look at here. I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live. Very few people lived after crucifixion. Matter of fact, nobody lived. They made sure you did. But it says, nevertheless, I live. Yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. That's the Bible in one verse right there. As Christians, our whole point of living is living through the faith in Christ. What did Christ do, and what has he told me to do? If we don't, we're going to fall short. That perfect storm is coming one day. You all know the verse. The just, give me that word, give me that S word, shall live by faith. It's not should. If you're saying should, you're going to be in that cold water, or that warm water. What does the Bible say about God in warm water? They spew you out of his mouth. He's looking for hot. Warm and cold is considered almost the same because it ends in the same result. We're supposed to be on fire. Now, what does on fire mean? I haven't had that question in a while. Zealous. Well, what does zealous mean? I'm going somewhere with this, Banco. You're right. You know, you watch TV. You see people running down the hall, running down the pews, running down the pews, hands waving and everything. Is that zealous? No. That's a form of godliness without understanding. All zealous is, it comes from the inside, is doing what God's word tells you to do. Passion. Does that make sense? I tell people, I'm going to say it during the opening too. It all goes down to what you value most. If I ask a Christian, what do you value most? By God, the Bible, Christianity. That makes sense. So then if worship starts at 10 o'clock, would you come in every day at 10:15, 10:20? We know things can happen. Turnpike, Lord knows I know. But when you value, don't you make the time to spread out the time to make sure you get here early enough? Same thing for Bible study. What you truly value, you make sure you scrape out time to make sure I can get this done. Talk to a teacher whose lesson plans are not done Sunday evening while they're still up late. Because they got to teach from a lesson plan in the morning. Whatever you value, you're going to make time for. I hope was that the first bell? As Christians, I hope we can take that time and map out what God would have us to do first. Looks like we're going to be able to finish this chapter. Look at verse 38. One of my favorite words, persuaded. For I am, did I skip one? I'm sorry, 37. Nay, in all things we are more than what? Through, who is the him? That loved us. What does that mean? I've heard people read that and quote it all day long. What does more than conquerors mean? What's greater than a conqueror? Conqueror means you won. During the Olympic Games, a conqueror was given a crown to put on. Crown, I forget what they call it, olive branches. But back in these days, you actually got a crown after you won. So how could you be more than a conqueror? Anybody? Oh, you're on the right track, my Trinidadian brother. You're absolutely. Christ has already won. That's what Isaiah 53 is all about. The war is already won. We just have to do our part. And the victory, we've won already. Thing is, can we live like it? It's like, oh, I'm down. You can't be down every day. You're a Christian. What has you down? Let's talk about it. You've won. You just have to endure now. What did God tell Joshua? Be thou courageous and strong. What else did he ultimately say? The part of that verse that gets me is when he said, wherever your foot goes, you will have success. Can you imagine I can understand warfare. Can you imagine if my general told me that? I would have been tap dancing all over Kuwait and Iran. It's like no matter where my feet goes, I'm getting success as long as I do what God says. Study my word and tap dance. He was guaranteed that. But what if I told you we're guaranteed the same thing? We just read it in Romans 8 around verse 28. I'll read it again for emphasis' sake. Have we read it yet? Yes. Verse 28. And we know that all things, that's it all, right? Things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. That's just like Joshua 1 and 9. Really, Joshua 1, because he said it multiple times. It's just, do we have enough faith to live like that? Or does that but come in? Now it says, 38, for I am persuaded. What does persuaded mean? There's a reason why I appreciate that word. Sometimes you have to face some things to come to a conclusion. Paul had been through a lot, so he says, I am persuaded that neither death, that's a powerful word, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature. Let's freeze right there. What's the street version of that? Nothing can separate you from the love of Christ. Each one of those has a unique meaning, and we'll discuss that, Lord's will, Wednesday night. But that's just saying everything. It says, shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus, our Lord. Can you imagine that? That's why we have to be more than conquerors. The war is already won. Imagine if there was a war that went on all the way up at the corner where a gas station is, and it starts down here, and they just dropped us off to get in the war. Then we hear from the front line, it's all clear. All you got to do is walk through. Everything's done. What would you do? Start mounting up even more? No, the war is already won. You walk on down because you've won the war. We've won it because of what Christ did. By his stripes, we are healed. We have to live by that. Now, the big mistake is will the flesh still get hot, burnt sometimes? Yeah, because it's not living for Christ. But the soul and spirit, as long as you feed it, is in a good place. That's why it says it's not worthy to be compared. Thank you all for listening. We'll close out now in prayer, and we will return back here at 10 o'clock. The brothers are going to meet in the back. Bow with me.